Okay, it looks like we're live. Hi, everybody. Hi, all the artists who are here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us on this Zoom call. My name is Esther Hernandez. I'm the chief curator at Union Hall. And for those of you that don't know, Union Hall is a nonprofit art space based in Denver, Colorado that opened its doors in 2019. And we predominantly support emerging curators through our Rough Gems program and emerging artists, especially in the Denver area through our exhibitions. This exhibition called Ruins is part of our Rough Gems program, and Rough Gems is our annual open call and collaborative curatorial program. So each year, there are three curators are mentorship, support, financial support, and the use of our gallery space. This year, it's been a pleasure to work with Nathan. And I'm so sorry about my audio. So I'm going to make this really short. I just want to quickly thank our sponsors, the Coloradan Community Foundation and the Kenneth King Foundation. And for the people watching on YouTube, there will be time for questions, and you can put those in the YouTube chat. And we'll address those after Nathan's presentation. Anyway, it was a pleasure to work with Nathan. I'm really excited to hear more about the work and the specific pieces that are in the exhibition. So I'll let Nathan take it from here.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Esther. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you to the team at Union Hall, Denver, for facilitating this conversation. And then thank you again to the artists who are from across the country and have participated in this show and this discussion tonight. I'm Nathan Storey. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, curator, writer, educator based in Boulder, Colorado. And I'm the curator of this exhibition, Ruins Performing Queer History, which is at Union Hall, Denver, now in its final days. So it's closing this Saturday at March 15th. And so if you're in the Denver area, be sure to check it out. So tonight I'm going to be introducing the exhibition. I'll be reading a little bit from the curatorial text, and then I'm going to invite the group of artists here to talk more about their specific works and greater studio practices. And then we will conclude with a Q&A. So if anyone tuning in has a question, I believe there should be a chat. So please drop your questions in the chat. All right. So I'm just going to be reading a little bit from the curatorial text. So Ruins Performing Queer History is an exhibition of interdisciplinary artists reckoning with queer archives within their studio practices. Archives are alive, pulsing with history, memory, and ruin. Simultaneously, they are fragmentary, evoking a longing for a time and place you cannot name. Archives bridge the past, present, and future, symbolic of the inevitability of our time slipping away. Derrida's idea of hauntology, the haunting of the present by the spectral remnants of lost futures, suggests a collapse of the past, present, and future into a fluid, queer temporality. The artists in Ruins embrace hauntological methods, working with traces of the past that loom over queer culture. Jessica Bowie examines lesbian visibility and the representation of femme bodies in visual culture. Sicko Girl combines pop culture imagery with frantic mark making, embodying queerness at the edges, caught between desire and shame. Dylan Chapman explores the trans and gender expansive search for visual legacies of intimacy. Temporal collapse threads through cytomegalovirus, layering original footage from the COVID-19 pandemic with an AIDS-era interview featuring Hervé Guibert, urging the viewer to draw connections between historical moments shaped by illness and isolation. Sifting through archives and cruising share an intimate sense of seeking, deciphering, and uncovering hidden desires. Both involve longing and connection, and like cruising, signs, gestures, and codes often shaped by secrecy. There's an erotic charge to the act of discovery, the thrill of finding something unexpected, whether a forgotten love letter, a clandestine photograph, or a fleeting encounter. Both acts create a bridge between past and present, revealing how desire moves through time, adapting but never disappearing. Influenced by gay artists of 1980s New York, Kyle Quinn wrestles with legacies of homoerotica, fetish, and cruising. Alexander Richard Wilson's paintings delve into the spontaneity of chance encounters in Denver's cruising spots, like Cheeseman Park and the local bar Trade. Wilson examines how cruising offers a space for transformation, where identity becomes fluid, shaped by desire, and the freedom to momentarily become someone else. To perform queer history is to also expand queer history, uncovering forgotten narratives and reinterpreting the past. Cody Norton seeks out queer elders in rural America to reclaim space in which queer bodies have always existed. Using hide as both material and metaphor, Badger Confessions explores the tension between visibility and survival, where queerness is both felt and obscured. Laser-etched imagery emerges like a ghost, lingering in the space between erasure and endurance. B. Oakley's Gender Fail project explores the intersection of queer print culture and protest, highlighting the power of publishing as a form of resistance. Their work also broadens the scope of what are traditionally seen as queer issues by intertwining queer and Palestinian liberation. A takeaway print draws inspiration from a 1970 Gay Freedom Day banner in San Francisco bearing the words, "Our fight has just begun." The artist solidaristically added again and again, binding past and present liberatory movements. So for me, I think there's a current movement of queer artists who are looking backward. And I think this deep preoccupation with the queer archive is in part due to the lingering effects of the AIDS crisis, an utter catastrophe ignored by the US government, leading to the loss of an entire generation, a crisis which is still not over. And this urgency of archival engagement is now inflamed as the Trump administration again attempts to erase queer histories, which we know have always existed. So to perform queer history is to reach backward and reckon with ruin. It is to find oneself within the rubble. To perform queer history, to grapple with collective pasts, allows us to look toward queer futures. Okay, thank you for bearing with me as I read through that. I would love to now introduce the artists who can maybe share a little bit more about their work in the show, as well as their overall studio practices. So I'd love to start with Jessica Bowie. If you want to share a little bit about your work and what you've included in Ruins.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Nathan, for including this work in the show. This has been such a fun process. The work that's included in the show is two separate pieces. This image we're seeing now is a collage work of mine that I completed, I think, in 2023. It's funny, Nathan caught me at a time when I wasn't really actively making work, and I was kind of waffling between, I had been making full time, having a sort of full time art practice for many years, and I had reached a point where I think I needed a small break, and I needed to try some other things for a bit, and I was a little anxious about, some of this work that I had done was so sporadic and kind of, not maybe as deeply or thoroughly researched as, previous work that I had done. But at the same time, I think that kind of, that was extremely refreshing to be given an opportunity to show some work that is a bit more expressive. My practice is primarily centered in photography and collage, as you can see, but photography as a whole tends to be, sort of a very precise sort of medium where, you're dealing with things very preciously. I'm thinking sort of specifically like just posing a subject, and if you're using a large format camera, the sort of really intricate moments of just setup that are sometimes required to make an image. And I know a few people here personally, and I think they could agree. I've never been terribly precious with any of my work. I try I try not to be. And so I think I always had this friction with photography where, yes, it's like required this kind of delicateness that I couldn't really have. And so reaching into archives and kind of looking backwards, as Nathan said, into, for me, into pop cultural imagery, that really kind of became a big part of the images that I was making. And after a while, I sort of started to realize it was more of like the psychology of images that I was interested in, a little less interested in sort of making this pristine objects and images, and a little more in just using them to explore some new ideas. So anyway, this collage in the show is this sort of, chaotic, expressive thing that I had never really intended to show anybody. It had just been kind of sitting in my studio for a long time, and it's I think a really I don't know. It's for me, it was an experiment with mark making and some new kind of defining some new iconography for myself, and kind of stretching a little bit what is photography, and what are the boundaries of that sort of specificity. And I guess content wise, all of my work is kind of involved with women's bodies and their sort of presence in media, their sort of use and abuse throughout the history of image making. And so, this second piece that's in the show, this is a series called Sleepers that, again, I was really not terribly, it was just things that I was doing that I wasn't, really thinking actively about as part of my practice. It was kind of just something I was doing in my free time, which was trying to get reacquainted with the camera, despite, I think I have like a love-hate relationship with the camera. I'm kind of constantly angry with it and the things I make with it, and then also kind of constantly like wanting it and wanting to do things with it. So in this period of kind of non-activity, I was just taking pictures in a very casual kind of documentary way, which I hadn't really done before. And I watch a lot of film. I find myself drawn towards film and film writing these days, and I wish I could speak to this a little more intentionally, but I have to be honest, I really just had the impulse one day to photograph the screen of my laptop while I was watching a film. And I don't know about the rest of you, but my laptop is disgusting. There's dust and thumbprints everywhere. I wish I could say I cleaned it as often as I should, but I don't. But that was interesting. And I was just interested in kind of seeing what kinds of images I could make from using a film camera, medium format camera, to photograph a digital screen. And again, this kind of preciousness that photography sometimes requires, that kind of went away because there's all this crap on the screen and that's coming through in the images. And then I process the images in my bathtub at home. And so there, again, is another layer of a kind of impreciseness where, it's completely homegrown, and I'm not a master developer. I've certainly make mistakes with chemistry. You can see, and in that there are some like sort of really visible kind of scarring, I guess I'll call it. But then again, another layer of, I wasn't precious with the negatives on purpose. I sort of didn't use gloves. I didn't use, dust cleaner. I got my fingerprints all over them. And again, it was not something I did with a ton of intention, but once I scanned those images in and I see all the dust and the thumbprints, it just kind of felt like something interesting. And and that's sort of then came Nathan, and we discussed this in some length about, I'm not sure what I'm doing with this. I'm not sure where these are going. All I know is I'm interested in these images of women, and I guess in particular to this series, I sort of set up boundaries for myself to only photograph scenes of women sleeping, and that came with it this sort of illegibility, I think, where in the final images you can't necessarily tell if they're at rest or if they're unconscious or alive or sick or in the throes of pleasure, or there's an illegibility there, and that kind of confusion is what I'm interested in, sort of in a larger place in my work. So that's that.
No, I mean, that's really interesting, Jessica. And something that I'm really excited about is, also thinking about ways like maybe we expand what the queer archive is, because you're working with kind of mass media photographs, especially in the collage, this way. And thinking about maybe how do we take elements from like mainstream media and twist them or subvert them or queer them, and especially, from images from the past. Like I know these are kind of like 2000s references. So
yeah, no, that's a really good, that rings true, definitely. Yeah, most of the images that I source are from sort of a contemporary mainstream media that is inherently not queer, or at least its intentions are rarely queer. And and that's something I've always kind of done in my practice, is a kind of like recontextualization, taking images and sort of editing them and placing them in sort of different contexts, and that inherent kind of mismatch being this sort of, I don't know, maybe it's a kind of reenactment of queerness in a way, not super explicitly, but it is, and it is, I think, a kind of a mismatch of place and source, and that really tickles me in image making. So
well, thank you so much, Jess.
thank you.
I think this is a great transition into also Dylan Chapman's process. Dylan, would you like to introduce your work and tell us a little bit about your practice?
Hi everybody. First, thank you, Nathan and Esther and everyone involved in putting the exhibition together. And thank you to everybody here sharing space with us right now. Um, so let's see, order of operations. That's what they teach us in math, right? Um, so this project you're seeing on the screen is part of this larger body of work that I've been developing over the past several years since I finished graduate school. So you're seeing these Polaroids that I have taken on my laptop screen. So there's kind of a through line between Jessica's work and mine. Um, and I've been developing this body of Polaroids based on fine art photographers, but also kind of like sort of pre-AIDS era, like sort of gay publications, kind of like fitness or sort of physique magazine, like images that I've been able to kind of find online. Um, and so I've been kind of cropping in and trying to turn these kind of like full scale portraits or sort of full body like photographs into portraits. And the process of using the Polaroid and photographing the laptop, there's something about the kind of plastic lens that won't let it focus entirely. And so it abstracts the image. And so I'm really interested in these like images of queer men by queer photographers. That was kind of like a first instance of like seeing my history, as a queer person when I was in undergrad. And so that's really where I fell in love with photography and really fell in love with the idea of maybe being an artist. And so I've been making these photographs and like really interested in this process of like implicating myself as a viewer, as someone who likes to look at images like these, both like a historical curiosity, but also I just think they're really beautiful, and sort of trying to trace this kind of gaze. And I have like a lot of thoughts that I'm trying to kind of formulate right now, but like a thing that like really bothers me about contemporary discourse is like the decontextualization of things. And so I really I'm interested in this project, and I call it Fragments of Desire, an index more than an archive, because I'm really like trying to like collect all of these images and like try to create this index of like queer photography um, through this process. And like the Polaroid becomes really special. There's a essay in Hervé Guibert's book Ghost Image where he talks about the Polaroid as like simultaneously like this kind of like children's toy, but also like this like very early site of like queer visual culture. Like because you don't have to take it to a lab or send the images off, you're able to produce the images by yourself. So it facilitated a kind of intimacy between like a queer photographer and subject. It just wasn't really possible before unless you like had the ability to like like develop things by yourself. And so I'm like taking this kind of object and like turning something digital into something physical, um and then trying to turn it into something else entirely, because for me it's not so much about the preciousness of the object, even though I do think that they're quite lovely. I'm really interested in like tracing the kind of trajectory. And so I scanned those Polaroids, these two here. One is a self-portrait by Hervé Guibert, and another is a portrait by him of a collaborator and sort of intimate partner. And then I printed them on transparency sheets so that they could be placed in this light box. So I'm thinking about the kind of transformation of the image as it circulates and the kind of degradation of it. Think a lot about Ito Sterl's text in defense of the poor image. And so I'm really interested in the kind of accumulation or the kind of degradation of the image. And instead of like trying to present this pristine archive, I'm like showing you like how I'm kind of like engaging with these images. And then I'm, as like an academic and sort of nerd, I'm like giving you a footnote so that you can find the original image and you can see the process through which these images have been sort of changed and like the decisions that I've made. So I'm like citing my my sources. And then I guess maybe that takes us to like the film, which is called Cytomegalovirus, which is also the name of one of Hervé Guibert's novels, in which he's detailing a hospital stay where he's trying this experimental treatment. He has cytomegalovirus, which is a common sort of, co-contraction with HIV, where people would slowly lose their sight. And as Guibert was a photographer, there's a kind of tragedy in that. And so I was really thinking about this like process of looking and reflecting. And I didn't really set out to make this film. I was just sort of shooting footage while I was like locked up during the pandemic. These are mostly like in and around former professors' like home that they let me stay in during the pandemic. And so I was really just kind of thinking about like looking and like being present and experiencing things. And then when I was just researching things about Hervé, I stumbled upon this interview and I was like, oh wow, like what a beautiful snippet of someone's life. And I inserted that audio into the footage and kind of arranged things. And I was thinking about like, maybe this was like a documentary program or like a radio station that I was like listening to during the pandemic or something. I think that it has that kind of affect. And so, thinking about the kind of relationship between these sort of epidemic moments and also like the kind of differences that, the sort of impact of that, right? Like we see how quickly something was done about COVID-19. And I mean, we still see the impacts of the AIDS crisis in different ways, both I think in terms of like public health, but also in terms of like material culture and the way that it's changed the way that queerness is like able to exist in the public eye. I think that kind of stigma from the AIDS crisis is like still attached to it. And so I'm like really interested in trying to like continue unearthing these things in my practice as this kind of renegade historian, as we are, as you kind of noted, continually being attempted to like be erased from public life, as is happening right now yet again. So just like trying to like take these things from the past and like push them forward and like leave a little bit of my mark on them, but also just trying to, introduce these things, because finding Hervé's work was like really revolutionary for me as like a young queer person and a professor, just like, oh, you should look at this book. And then I fell in love with his photographs and I started down this trajectory. And so, a lot of my work is really just kind of about like trying to just search through the things that I can find, and trying to like make sense of them, and then present them for other people to also try to make sense of. Yeah, and I think I've talked plenty.
No, thank you, Dylan. I just would love to maybe ask you, and you've touched on this, maybe could you just talk a little more about, your specific relationship to Hervé's work, as both works are, really seeking dialogue, with him and his experience and his work. Maybe you could share just a little bit about, that initial relationship.
Yeah. Well, I like, I'm an artist and I also write about other people's work. And writing has become pretty essential to my art practice, even though it's not super represented in this show. And I think really reading that first book by Hervé, Ghost Image, like that really made me feel like I could also talk about my relationship to images, like the way that he was describing things and how personal it was. It was so different than like a Susan Sontag or like a Roland Barthes, kind of conversation around photography. I really liked that kind of like auto-theoretical approach. And then, I was really obsessed with his writing. And then it actually wasn't for a while that I looked into his photography. And I just thought that they were so, like the photographs were so beautiful and still, like there's like a kind of quietness in them, that I found to be really peaceful. And so I don't know, like, I guess he's like kind of like a role model in some ways. I think I had like a crush on him as well. It's like this kind of complicated thing. I'm just kind of like fangirling over him. you know.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dylan. All right. So Cody Norton's unfortunately not here tonight, but you can catch his installation still on view until Saturday. So next, I would love to invite B, if you would like to share a little bit about this work and your greater practice.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm B. Oakley. I'm based here in Queens, New York, in New York City. Just to give some background, yeah, I've been doing gender fail since 2015. It's been a way of self-publishing my work, but also publishing the work of other incredible queer, trans, and non-binary people. I'm less particular and it's more on good work, but when you surround yourself with incredible artists and talented artists, they happen to be mainly queer and trans, in my opinion. Obviously, I mean, a lot of, queer and trans people are incredible, so it's not a surprise that I publish a lot of great works. And one thing I want to comment on is how Nathan and I kind of got familiar with each other's work. Since 2018, I've been making protest signs based on protest events, basically since the Stonewall riots of 1969. And one day I was tagged and saw that Nathan had used one of my fonts in their MFA thesis exhibition, which is so cool because with this body of work and these protest fonts, they're open source. So there's kind of a loss of control how people use it. I, provide them as resources for other queer and trans folks to use in their work, but unless they like notify me or tag me, I never know. And it's always truly the coolest thing as an artist to see another artist using it in their work, especially to grapple with our collective past and, have us acknowledge our histories, which a lot of us do as queer and trans people, but of course, newer generations, and of course, even myself being 33, like I wasn't taught queer history in school. So it's really great when, well, not great. It's important that we teach each other our histories because otherwise that's not being taught, especially in this climate. Yeah, and I just want to note anyone can use these fonts, well, any queer, trans, and non-binary people in their work. Please do, please research them. I'll give a link at the end of, well, you can just go to genderfailpress.info and find links there. So always trying to, tell more people about the work. So for this work, in particular, when Nathan invited me, which I was so honored to, because I don't show work as much as I would like to. I mean, I am thankful that I'm able to, like, on average once a year, but gender fail takes up a lot of my time just trying to survive capitalism and publishing books. And thankfully makes a little bit more money, but anyway, I created a new typeface based on the pro-Palestinian campus occupations at Columbia University, which was one of many that spread like wildfire throughout the United States. I hate, I've been teaching a workshop and there's so much violent language that we use, like spreading like wildfire is obviously like such an intense like euphemism, especially with everything going on with the fires. So excuse me of that. And I'm trying to unlearn so much like intentional like violent language that is in embedded in us, but anyway it spread to so I'm always so inspired by students and by making these fonts, especially with more recent protest events. I think in a way I help to in a small way historicize the event, something like the pro-Palestinian encampments at Columbia University are continually inspirational to me. It's such a powerful moment of dissent by students, especially as we're seeing now with the amount of backlash and, deportations and, really petty and violent repercussions that are happening to those students, which obviously there's been a lot of incredible protests to that as we're speaking now, and I'm sure happening literally right now to that. So, these events reverberate in our society. So this exhibition was a perfect opportunity for me to show this typeface, to make a work with it. And back in December 2023, I published this Against the Death Wish in a Death Obsessed World, which was commenting on the really intense and kind of carefree way that I saw folks that identified as Zionists kind of wishing death upon people that they've never met in their lives. And I can't think of a single human being that I would so effortlessly wish death upon. And it bothers me, and it should bother us all how easy it is for us to wish death upon fellow human beings for, you know, I mean, obviously, we're just talking about genocide here and ethnic cleansing and things like that, which I think we're all trying to grapple with, or if you have any form of empathy or a conscience, you grapple with, hopefully on a, not on a daily basis, but that idea should carry the weight that it does. And unfortunately, in society, I think a lot of terms and things that are intense have become desensitized. I think there's a lot of opportunities when we think of that, that you can think of. And with this, I'll just read the quote that I pulled from the text. I wanted to typeface, and as an artist, it's kind of cool to think of zine work as a way to kind of, um, find different ways of displaying zines. And I do a lot of written essay work, so it's kind of interesting to think about how can this work exist in a fine arts kind of environment or in a gallery without it just being a zine on a pedestal, because I love zines and I wish that had the power that it did, but finding other ways of displaying works coming from text-based works and zines is important to me. But anyway, you can kind of read it in there, but I'll read it out loud anyway. I will never wish death upon another human being, regardless of their disregard for human life. Even jokingly or in conversation, I won't casually wish for another to be killed or dead. I will, however, welcome shame, spit, disgrace, public outcry, restorative justice, curses, spells, and other acts up until the wanting and wishing for death of another person. I will also not judge others who choose otherwise in situations that force their hand to inflict violence or death upon another. So also in that last part too, to understand that violence isn't something we choose, and it's often something that, we're forced into. So also not having this purely pacifist kind of stance when talking about this, because obviously situations and life is more complicated than my own, that I can not imagine. And yeah, this essay is really directly influenced by, videos I saw when I was making this. Like, I wrote down some examples, like research videos of the Israeli army doing exercises with water bottles, mocking the thirst of Palestinians. An older giantish woman telling a pro-Palestinian Hasidic Jewish protester that they wish they had been killed, and I'm not going to say it because in a vile manner. Zionists yelling to Palestinian protesters things like "you need to be cooked" and other things that I don't want to repeat here. You know, an Israeli woman singing a pop song about ethnic cleansing to a group of like hypermasculine, you know, Zionist army IDF soldiers who are about to go into Gaza. I mean, it's just there's so many examples of videos of just like of that are so violent and so intense and so vile that just like kind of like obviously those of us, I mean a lot of us, I mean that's why so much protest has happened in the last few years around this. It's because we can't let that be. We can't let that be perpetuated into normality, which it is unfortunately for a lot of people. And one thing, this still is a video piece that goes, it's about 2 minutes long, so it goes in and out. Also with the typeface that I am featuring here from the Columbia pro-Palestinian protest signs. So there's only a certain amount of characters that I can find. So whatever characters or letters I wasn't able to find, I swapped out with a symbol of a man and a woman in chains holding a key, a reference to the right of return movement, which is used in the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, BTS, which is an important symbol of resistance for the Palestinian people. And the entire lowercase of this typeface is all symbols back and forth of the symbol of a man and symbol of a woman. So it kind of goes in and out. So this video slowly goes to the same statement typed in the lowercase with the symbols of that powerful symbol of resistance for folks. So, why am I making work about this? To me, it's really important as queer people that we infuse our struggles with other oppressed folks. And to me, to call yourself queer is a political stance, a stance of resistance for not only queer, trans, and non-binary or gender divergent people, but for all peoples facing genocide, oppression in our society and societies around the world too, which I'm not the only person that thinks this, and this is a widely accepted term, but it's super important that we are in solidarity with our comrades around the world. And also, I just want to, make clear, using the term Zionist is a colonial project that is embedded with white supremacy. Zionism does not reflect the incredible histories of survival and resistance of our Jewish comrades. So I think to me, that's embedded in saying all this, but I think it's important to underline exclamation point that, projects like Jewish Voices for Peace, uh, I as a non-religious person am in solidarity with my Jewish comrades and my Palestinian comrades and any faith comrades fighting for the stop of the apartheid of the Palestinian people, which, yeah, I'll kind of end it there. But again, if you want to read this essay too, you can also go to genderfailpress.info to either download the fonts or read this essay if you just find um, the cover of this too. So. Okay,
Great.
thank you, Nathan.
Thank you so much, V. I would also just love to ask if you if you wanted to share anything about this takeaway print, and where this is also sourced from as well.
Yeah, so I actually created this while I was in graduate school in 2016, which was around I was in school when Trump was first elected. So, I was making a lot of work before the election and just have been for a while of sourcing queer history, and a lot of my like professors and everything were just kind of like, yeah, queer, things are fine for queer people, but like for many people, like the first election of Donald Trump, and since then has like invoked this kind of like it made some people kind of face the precarity of life that so many of us have realized for a long time, those that aren't like cis white, straight, economically, privileged folks. So, it's kind of great to just talk about kind of what I mean, this is the perfect work. I think this was the work in particular that you wanted in the show because I think it speaks so perfectly to what the show is about to, as you kind of, I think you mentioned it earlier, the first part of this, which is taken word for word, is our fight has just become. And on the back, you can see documentation of the original sign. And like Nathan said, I added again to show the long arc of our events. Go back just like 30 or 40 years. It's like, I think I'm reminded of things all the times, like, an unmarried, just as a very simple example, like an unmarried cis woman couldn't have their own credit card until like the mid 1970s. That's like one of the many, like, we think, where we are now is so divorced from the past, but there's so many people living today that have lived and are still currently living under horrific things that you'd never expect in quote unquote like the future, which is like I'm talking about like 2025. So yeah, it's a free takeaway print, and it I guess has like almost a 10-year history too. And I guess that man is back in office too, which again, there's I mean, people are resisting that, but we need to keep that momentum up. And one last thing, a lot of my work is about inspiring people and giving hopefully them a little bit of fuel to continue resistance. I suffer with a lot of like mental health and anxiety things and agoraphobia that doesn't allow me to leave my house as much as I wish to, or to be in public protests. And my work in a way is, I'm kind of like, it's like fan art of protesting in a way, or, like helping to inspire others to continue their work, but also to keep these events and this work alive through my work and through other people using it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, B. All right, and so next I'll invite Kyle. Kyle, would you like to share more information on your work in the show and your practice?
Yeah, my name's Kyle Quinn, and I'm a Brooklyn, New York artist. I have a studio practice in Gowanus. I kind of do painting, photography, and sculpture. Nathan curated me very well. This show is super goth. I love how dark it is, ominous. Everything looks like it's like floating. The pieces you see in this are two Polaroids that are shadow boxed. One photo Nathan picked that's very good. And I'm constantly taking photography, Polaroids, 35 millimeter, and digital photos. And then I created the roses, and that's graphite, acrylic, latex on birch panels. And the whole installation is meant to look like a bouquet. That's actually the title of it. As if the two photos are holding the flowers, and then you'll see the popper sculpture that's on the pedestal in the middle. Yeah, you gave me like a really great corner. Like everything looks like it's floating. You killed it. I've known Nathan for a long time. He first knows me through Raw Meat Collective, which is a publishing collective I do of my own work along with other artists. Only LGBTQ plus artists, mostly fine art, contemporary, photography, painting, sculpture, and more on the darker side. So yeah, the photos are pulled from cruising. I don't photograph people's faces. I only use their bodies. It's kind of like my way of using men in my practice. And then I just love painting and drawing, and everything in here is new for the show, which was really great. Nathan wanted to show one photo, and then it kind of spawned in this corner, and it looks very good together. My images are pulled from old Life magazine, Time magazine, newspapers, porno, vintage erotica. It just varies. Old videos, old film. Yeah, it just really depends on what my mood is.
Yeah, so I am very interested in, I think a lot of your imagery and like sources feel very nostalgic and, influenced by maybe like 70s or 80s. So could you maybe speak a little more on that kind of inspiration?
Yeah, like the sculpture itself is a bathhouse tile, and it's meant to emulate like an 80s bathhouse cruise culture. And it's two bottles of poppers, clear casting resin, vintage erotica. I do a lot of collage work and drawing. And I make those as studies. So this is a combination of those on glass tile, painted birch panel, clear casting resin, and a little bit of latex. A lot of my work is like in vein of Rauschenberg, but in the sense of very structured color. And I thrive off of minimalism. Like I only use red, black, and white because I should challenge myself as an artist. And I enjoy cruising, so that's kind of where like cruise culture comes in. I do pull from old eras, but my photos are current because I'm currently doing that. Um, I used to run a Polaroid photo booth at a sex party for a long time. That connected me to a queer community in New York when I first moved here. And now I do private photo sessions in my studio, couples, single men, gay men. It just like varies.
Hmm. All right. Well, amazing, Kyle. I really appreciate this blend of both, 80s erotica and, your contemporary materials. So thank you so much. All right. So now I'll invite, last but not least, Alexander Richard Wilson. Alexander, would you like to introduce your work and your practice?
Hi, Nathan. It was really wonderful to be invited to exhibit at Union Hall in ruins. And when you reached out, you sent me the super stunning text and the reference to the piers and these kind of fleeting contact moments of stimuli, of hope, of anxiety, of intrigue and sexual allowance really stuck out in my mind as a foundational way to build a small suite of work for the show. So I went about this in a pretty like classical way also. I went to my favorite kinds of intersectional cruising spots. I tried to go to places where, or draw on places locally wherein it felt really beautiful and really honest. So this first painting is of Denver's Trade, and this is a bar that to me stands out as a much more physically supportive and dimensionally positive space in the queer community, in the trans mask presenting way. And I enjoy the climate of the space. And I wanted to kind of image it as this Matisse-esque or Kirchner-esque composition of people feeling really free and happy and walking into a queer space and knowing it's a positive, or knowing that there is a positive anticipation there. These three, so thanks, Nathan. The first painting is the smallest, but I put the most amount of time into that painting, and it was to honor the heart and narrative soul to me of a lot of cities, which is women, trans women, queer women collecting and holding court and structuring the community around them and having standards and having conditions. So I went about painting Denver's Colfax Street, as it's known in history as the Queen City, and acknowledging the girls, the dolls, the princesses that made men stop and behave and built the infrastructure that makes a lot of Denver's stuff nice. Moreover, it's also an honorific kind of to this pretended away American history of people being sexual, of women being in charge of exchange, of being able to control the power dynamic within an exchange. And I wanted to kind of honor that too within this space of Colfax and bar and community and the girls having a key, to paraphrase. The second image in frame is an ode to a personal experience of being, on a trail in a cruising kind of headspace, in a cruising capacity, and having a friend have this kind of like crisis of self-evaluation, self-allowance. Do I deserve pleasure? Am I allowed to be queer here? This composition is also kind of about being Black and white, Black and other in space. I kind of have this hope for representational politics, that when people are also in the same class, they are conscious of that. So I wanted to kind of represent my own also experiences with queerness and color in this very like closed way. My last image is a portrait of a bald Black man with the pawa shell necklace and the mustache and the earring. And I wanted to also finish with this kind of like smoke showy, you can't defeat me, marqueed sensation. I kind of wanted to lock in the perspectives of the room, and his head turn is 3/4 to peer out, to kind of look towards something adjacent. Not something straight on, but an adjacency. There's this desire in documenting experiences and acknowledging history to allow for freedom in placing oneself in context as well. So there's so many things about rendering Denver and the cruising dimensions of it I tried to leave open for people who want to look at imagery that includes them as queer people, to kind of speak to B. Oakley's commentary about this dimensional space being a bit of a temple.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you.
And yeah, I was really excited that these works, are inspired by Denver's own, queer communities and spaces. And I was wondering if you could maybe just touch a little bit on, I think a lot of your work is exploring these specific places like Colfax, like Trade, and maybe can you talk about like Denver's specific queer spaces and what you're trying to represent?
There's this thing in this city and in other American cities about the losing of our third place. And the third place operates as, for queer people, church. It operates as a dining room. It is also hospital often. There are so many things that can be achieved by 3 lesbians in a garage, and to speak to this kind of understanding, I wanted to take the subject matter of gay feelings, of queer moments, and really settle them. So for the Colfax painting, I painted this kind of adjacent to Pete's, and Pete's is a bar on Pete's Tire Lounge is a bar on Colfax, and there's this thing I'll do where I'll go outside and take a picture at different times of day to corroborate the narrative. But I had these 2 women stand against the wall in a very like lovely, flirty, conversational way. And these dimensions, the history of sex workers walking up and down Colfax was solid. You have 100 years of dolls buying houses in the suburbs with the money they made walking up and down the street in secret. So there's this just dimension I wanted to give to that. And then the painting of the 2 people of opposing races, there's also a third person in there who's a little naked. That's of Cheeseman in this kind of rotunda space by the Rose Court that is a cruising space. It turns into a very like free and sexually dimensioned space. I don't know about what people perceive American history to be, but to me, it's still at its best moments when people were free or felt freedom. And it's an incredible dimension to the civic fabric here. There are other cities where you go to a place and you're like, this is also a cruising space. But I feel like Cheeseman's is incredibly beautifully placed. And I was just thinking of this magnitude of gay perseverance being, we're going to do this right here. We're going to figure it out right here. And if you're down, it'll go like this, So also consent and allowance and dimensioning a cruising experience. And I, in the final image, the hot black man with the earring, he's kind of just standing in, I guess maybe like a rhino kind of space. But in my head, he's standing against the liminal mountains in a very like, I just live here. Mm-hmm. And it's maybe an ode to a gay perseverance I really appreciate in the mountains too. Mm-hmm. I also really loved the idea of just giving this figurehead like the overview of the other paintings in sequence and this like reviewing all of the queer spaces.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you very much, Alexander.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. And now I think we have time for a short Q&A. I believe Esther has some questions.
So there's a really good question coming in from the chat from Jared, and I'll just read it verbatim. Cody and Alexander's work alternatively present queerness in rural areas and in the city. So was this urban-rural tension a deliberate curatorial choice of yours? Or what do you think of these 2 different queer histories share and or learn from each other?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Jared. For me, I think there is this kind of, tension, but I think there is a narrative that, queer people kind of flee to this city, and the city is a utopia for queer people. But, and also studying a lot of queer histories, even in the cities, I find that queer people have made spaces and networks kind of in the shadows of the city. So I'm kind of thinking of like the Hudson River piers in New York and finding utopias even kind of on the shadow of the city. But I also kind of think, queer people create networks everywhere. And there's no singular queer experience. And so, I was super excited to share both, rural queer histories, and Cody Norton is really uncovering these different histories, as well as Alexander's like specific kind of research into Denver's scene. Alexander, I don't know if you want to touch on this as well, but oh yeah, here you go.
Yeah, no, in my mind, I was thinking there is this to the tension opposition Cody and I's work has in space. There is this acknowledgement of like the condition of this space has been established and you are within a tone. And queerness is something that can be found there in a way that it has to do with you also looking for it and being a willing participant in the exploration of it. So there's this nice, to me, pillar of Cody and myself. Everyone in this show is a pillar. Jessica's work is also a pillar. But there's this nice, powerful kind of bounce back, I think, in depicting the conventions. I also live very blackly and very queerly in the context of Denver. So in finding these spaces or realizing that this was positively intended or functioning, inclusive or successfully inclusive, kind of sexually positive space was a very big and enjoyable deal. I think I answered that. Yeah. In my head, I think, being queer and living in space requires the establishment of zones and the acknowledgement that, in the mountains of Arkansas, there are gay and queer and trans people. They live and breathe. They hunt in those woods. They know the roads in, the roads out. And we also know the best sidewalk, the best bike path, the best, bus, the way to get a coffee in a brunch rush, without losing your mom to the crowd. This is the binary of the idea of a binary.
Speaking of space, I wanted to ask you this question, Nathan, that Jess had shared with us. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired the title of the exhibition and where the word ruins comes from? Or maybe like talked about the imagery of the piers.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of, the original inspiration of this exhibition is, I am very interested in how artists are looking backward and engaging with different queer histories or even different, maybe previous queer artists. And so I was really struck by an artist named Every Ocean Hughes, who made a body of work of photographs of the ruins or the remnants of the Hudson River piers. That was the body of work was very much seeking dialogue with the photographs of Alvin Baltrop, who documented the piers as this queer space of cruising, but also of kinship, of sunbathing. But it was also, a dilapidated, ruin-esque space. And, I've just been thinking of, ruins are evidence of what has been, what has been lost. They're kind of another form of ephemera or a trace, some remnant of the past. And so, to me, evidence is so crucial in studying queer histories. And I, it's titled Ruins Performing Queer History. Not that, I'm including only performance artists, but I think that artists are actively performing queer history in their processes by engaging with these different legacies or these different histories and bringing them to the contemporary moment. I believe that they're performing queer history.
Thank you. So I feel like this exhibition touches on so many different topics within queer history, survival, secrecy, the AIDS crisis, isolation, desire, protest culture, cruising. And so was there like one topic in particular that you really resonated with or that you feel has influenced your creative life? I guess I'm asking Nathan as the curator, and then if anyone else wants to chime in about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I was so interested in covering, a whole range of issues with this show and including several different voices, perspectives, and backgrounds because, I think there, as I said, I don't think there is a singular queer experience. Queerness is made up of multiplicities. And queer issues can intertwine with so many other issues. For me and my personal research, I am really interested in artists of the AIDS crisis. I do a lot of research on, work being made post-Stonewall, leading into the AIDS crisis and the reactionary backlash of queer visibility, kind of leading into 1995, which is the year of my birth and is a year that had an all-time high of AIDS-related deaths. And I really researched this period because, it was a potent period of history that, the prospects with so many prospects of liberation that were met with just utter devastation. And so I think, I was very much thinking of the AIDS crisis and developing the show, but I also, wanted to include all of these other, voices that, might not be directly addressing that, but are of course, also in the shadow of. But if anyone else wants to speak towards, a specific issue that they wanted to address in the show, please do so.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And I know you also run Undertow editions. I was wondering if you wanted to speak to that a little bit as well.
Yes, so Undertow is just a small new print platform. We have a small workshop space in Boulder, and it is, a project to support, cultivate, and expand queer print culture. And so we're going to be making limited editions, zines, and then other ephemera such as matchbooks and different kind of, maybe postcards and posters, specifically working with queer artists that are producing queer print culture. And we're also going to have a platform online that will have, a feature called the Notebook, which is going to be a platform to invite scholars or artists or art historians or kind of anyone to engage in interdisciplinary discourse around the ways that print media has kind of formed different kind of queer subjectivities, has been a tool in queer liberation. So I'm excited about that as well. And we got to host a workshop, a collage workshop last week in the Ruins exhibition, which was great.
So we don't have any other questions coming in from the chat. But really quickly, I just wanted to ask everyone that's here if you have any projects that you have coming up that you want to share with our audience, or if there's anything we should look out for.
I was gonna be like, if you are in Denver and you would like to pick up a new magazine, Denverse is on newsstands, and I painted the image that's the cover. So that's mine.
I'll share something. It's been a long time in the making now. I'm hopefully by the end of this month, going into next month, I'm going to be publishing the first book of poetry by Legacy Russell, who's an incredible writer and
Ooh.
curator based in here in New York, who's the executive director of The Kitchen. So look out for that. It's a really beautiful work of poetry and Legacy's first, and it's influenced by her time with the Pompeii commitment, which is kind of like the artistic arm of the architectural side of Pompeii. So we're able to use a bunch of documentation from photographers documenting the site, which is really cool. So, and it's only $20.79 to kind of have it kind of work. So like the prices would be like 2000 years after the 79 AD collapse of Pompeii and Herculaneum and all the cities around there too. So look out for that.
I'll be running art book fair. It's called Other Islands Book Fair. It's at Pratt University, and that's Brooklyn campus, April 26th and 27th. And then I have a new book coming out called Heartache's Mine, and that's a bunch of photos, inspired paintings, writings, and yeah, a visual contemporary book.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Anyone else want to, any last comments, words, etc.?
I just thought it was such a gorgeous room, really stunning show. Everyone else did a really great job. Really proud of Union Hall all the time.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the artists for participating in the show and then also for this discussion. I feel like we got to cover a lot, and I feel like, you know, we only scratched the surface. So yeah, thank you so much again.
Awesome. Yeah. It is a beautiful show, and it was amazing to facilitate and be part of this process as you put together so beautifully. So thank you all for participating. And for the next exhibition is opening March 27th, and that's called Out of Time, Imagining the Future of America, curated by Ben Burney. And I also want to thank the Colorado Community Foundation and the Kenneth King Foundation for making this program possible and for supporting us. And with that, I will leave you all to have a good evening.
Cool. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. It was
Bye.
really great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Nathan.
Thank you, guys.
Yes,
Have a good night, everybody.
you too.